What if the next inflation wave doesn't come from central banks and it doesn't come from oil? What if it comes from a shipping route most people never think about? A narrow corridor of water connecting Europe and Asia. The Red Sea. In recent months, the Red Sea has turned into one of the most dangerous trade zones in the world, and this crisis isn't just geopolitical. It's economic. Because when shipping lanes become unsafe, trade becomes slower, insurance becomes more expensive, routes become longer, and prices begin rising worldwide. So today's video explains how the Red Sea crisis could quietly trigger a new wave of inflation. We'll break down why the Red Sea is one of the most critical trade routes on Earth, how disruptions affect global supply chains, and why this could increase the cost of living, even if you live thousands of kilometers away. Let's begin. Why the Red Sea matters. To understand this crisis, we need to understand geography. The Red Sea connects the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal. This route is one of the most important shortcuts in global trade because it links Asia gives Europe, Middle East gives Europe, and indirectly affects Asia gives us routes too. Every day, massive cargo ships use this corridor to transport consumer goods, electronics, clothing, machinery, energy products, industrial components. The Red Sea is not just a sea. It is a global trade highway, and if that highway becomes dangerous, the global economy pays the price. What happens during a shipping crisis? When a shipping route becomes unsafe, shipping companies face a choice: risk the route or avoid it completely. If they avoid it, many ships reroute around Africa, going past the Cape of Good Hope. Now think about what that means. The journey becomes longer, fuel consumption increases, delivery times rise, shipping capacity tightens, insurance costs jump, and freight rates rise. A longer route isn't just an extra trip, it's a global supply chain shock, because ships are limited resources. The real mechanism. Why this creates inflation. Now here's the key point. Inflation is not only caused by demand. Inflation can also come from supply shocks. A supply shock happens when goods become harder to produce, harder to transport, harder to deliver. The Red Sea crisis creates supply shocks through logistics, and when logistics become expensive, inflation spreads, because almost everything is connected to shipping. Even if a product is made locally, the inputs may not be. For example, parts, packaging, chemicals, machinery, materials. So when shipping costs rise, manufacturing costs rise too. Then companies raise prices, not instantly, but eventually. The hidden costs people don't see. Most people only notice the crisis when prices increase. Inflation headlines return. Delivery delays happen, but the most important costs appear earlier. 1. Insurance costs. High-risk routes require high premiums. Even if a ship isn't attacked, insurance becomes expensive. 2. Security costs. Some ships hire security or require special protection. 3. Fuel and operational costs. Longer routes mean more fuel and more crew costs. For delays and inventory pressure, when goods arrive late, companies must hold more inventory, and inventory costs money. All of these become inflation pressure, and they hit the global economy like silent waves, where prices get hit first. So what products are hit first? Usually, goods imported from Asia into Europe, electronics and appliances, clothing and consumer products, automotive components, industrial goods. Then, over time, inflation spreads into retail prices, business costs, and eventually consumer inflation indicators. But the key insight is this: you won't see the full inflation impact today, because the effect arrives with a lag. The inflation lag, YIT, comes later. Supply chains have memory. Businesses often have inventory stored in warehouses. So even if shipping costs spike today, companies can sell existing stock for a while. But once new shipments arrive, those new shipments are more expensive, and that's when prices rise. This lag can take 8 weeks, 12 weeks, sometimes longer. So when a shipping crisis hits, inflation does not explode instantly. It builds quietly, and then it appears in consumer prices, which is why many inflation waves seem sudden. This crisis is worse than it looks. The Red Sea crisis matters more than most people realize, because it happens in a world that is already sensitive. Global supply chains today are optimized for efficiency, not resilience, highly dependent on predictable routes, vulnerable to shocks. Even a small disruption can cause major price spikes, because the system is tightly stretched. If shipping times increase globally, the whole system becomes less efficient, and less efficiency means higher costs. So the crisis becomes more than geopolitics. It becomes inflation. The macro effect, what it means for central banks. Here's the dangerous part. Central banks try to control inflation by raising interest rates, but supply chain inflation is different. Interest rate hikes cannot make shipping routes safer. They cannot reduce insurance risk. They cannot shorten global trade distances. So if inflation rises due to shipping disruption, central banks face a difficult problem. Prices rise again, but it's not demand-driven, and rate hikes can slow growth. This creates a risk of slower growth plus higher prices, a situation economists call stagflation risk. That's why shipping disruptions are such powerful macro events. What investors watch. Investors and economists closely monitor container freight rates, global shipping indexes, port congestion, delivery times, energy prices. Because these signals help predict future inflation pressure, consumer price increases, and policy shifts. If freight rates spike and stay high, inflation expectations increase. And when inflation expectations increase, markets react. So, will this cause a new inflation wave? So the big question, will the Red Sea crisis trigger a new inflation wave? It depends on three factors. 1. Duration. Short disruptions may cause only temporary price pressure. Long disruptions can create sustained inflation. To scale. If many shipping companies reroute, capacity shrinks and rates surge. 3. Other shocks. If fuel prices rise at the same time, inflation pressure becomes much stronger. So the Red Sea crisis may not automatically bring massive inflation, but it does increase inflation risk, and it can act as a trigger if combined with other pressures. Inflation doesn't always start with government policy. Sometimes it starts with trade routes. The Red Sea is a perfect example. A narrow corridor of water that can influence global shipping costs, delivery times, supply chains, and the cost of living worldwide. So if you want to understand inflation early, don't only watch CPI reports. Watch the routes that move the global economy. Because sometimes the next inflation trigger is not in politics, it's in logistics. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and comment Red Sea if you want more episodes about hidden global economic signals. See you next time.